Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining us at another episode of On.NET Live. I'm Cecil Phillip, I'll be your host today. And in this stream today, we're gonna be talking about building microservices using a really cool framework called Steeltoe. And we'll also be talking a little bit about Azure Spring Cloud. And today I have a very special guest with me, Tim Hess from the Steeltoe team, who's gonna be joining us to talk about the framework and showing us some really cool demos and really just giving us an understanding of how we could use these things together. Now, if you saw the announcement, we were supposed to have another guest with us, but he was unable to make it today, sadly, because life happens and internet is unreliable sometimes. But if he ends up having to join us in the middle, we'll try and get him on. But for now, it'll just be me and Tim so far. But I think that'll be okay. So, Tim, how you doing, man? Why don't you say hi to everyone and tell us a little bit about yourself?
Hello, Internet. I'm an engineer on the Steeltoe team. Currently with VMware. I was with Pivotal for a couple of years before that. So it's been about 3 years on the Steeltoe project. I've been a developer for, 15 years or something like that. Once you get past a certain point, the years don't matter.
That's true.
Yeah, so we've just been working to build tools and frameworks to help make doing .NET microservices easy. With a particular focus on mixed environments where Java technology is also involved.
Nice. And I think this is a really good time for you to come on because I feel like November is like .NET month. Like so much great stuff happens and so many good releases happen in .NET during the month of November. For folks that may or may not know, last week we actually just had .NET Conf. That actually happened. It was between November 10th and 12th. And actually, let me show my screen really quickly. Before I forget, let me go ahead and put this up. So yeah, we had .NET Conf happening between November 10th and 12th. It was 100% live, tons of like great sessions and whatnot. And Tim, I actually think we had a Steeltoe session for that too.
Yeah, Dave Tillman did a session on messaging. So he went a lot more in depth than I'm going to go today. We're going to cover that topic pretty briefly.
Right. But if folks do want to learn a little bit more about it, all of these sessions, David's as well as everyone else's, they're all online. If you go ahead and check out the .NET YouTube channel and then click on the playlist for the .NET Conf playlist, you'll be able to check out some of these sessions and some of the other ones that you may have missed. But yeah, .NET Conf is really great. One of the things that I do want to point your attention to is that now that the conference is done, I'll definitely recommend you check out some of the local events that are happening. And these local events are really like little user groups and communities and tons of different folks that are hosting their own little mini conferences, their own little mini versions of .NET Conf, with tons of different speakers and like lots of different great topics talking about like .NET 5 and things like that. One, if you're interested in hosting your own local event, definitely head over to this website. It's netconf.net/local-events. If you either want to like start up your own, or maybe you just want to check out someone else's and watch it online. And lastly, speaking about conferences, I do want to point out MonkeyFest is happening this weekend. It is on November 21st, and MonkeyConf is all about building really great applications with Xamarin. So this is another community organized event. There's tons of great speakers and sessions that are happening, and it's all 100% free. So, you can't beat that price as far as I'm concerned. So if you're into mobile development with .NET, if you're really interested into Xamarin and those types of things, I definitely recommend you come over here and check it out. Lots of great speakers. I know James Montemagno is probably going to be here. Kim Philpotts is going to be here. Andreas Pineda is going to be here. I love Andreas. Andreas does a lot of great stuff. So again, like if you're into Xamarin, definitely recommend that you go ahead and check that out. All right, so I'm going to unshare my screen now. And now, how about we start off with talking about Steeltoe? So Tim, tell me, what exactly is Steeltoe? Like, give me like the elevator pitch introduction about like what is this thing and why should I care about it?
So Steeltoe is primarily a collection of NuGet packages that you can use bits and pieces of. You can pick the pieces you want to use and those that you don't want to use. But it's a collection of tools for doing microservices with .NET. A lot of it is built around 12-factor apps and cloud-native patterns.
Okay. And then, like a lot of times I hear people talk about microservices, and I know everyone has like a different opinion about what microservices are. But for me, I like to think about them as like a collection of patterns that I could use, right? And I can pick and choose the patterns that I can implement inside of my application. So we think about things like service discovery or even health checks, or we think about centralized configuration and messaging and, like telemetry and like all these great types of things. But again, I don't have to necessarily be building with containers or using Kubernetes or using framework X, right? Like they're really patterns that I can put into any application. So yep. As we're talking about .NET, like we could be talking about .NET full framework, we could be talking about .NET Core, we could be talking about .NET 5 and, different other types of applications, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Because Steeltoe is a collection of NuGet packages, and where possible, we build for .NET Standard. You can absolutely use a lot of these components in your full framework applications. Some of the components still run in WCF applications. So if you want to get crazy and shove some Steeltoe into your apps from 10 years ago, you can possibly do that.
Right. Okay, and I'm gonna go ahead and put up your slide on this your screen on this on the slide real quickly. Now I know recently you had a new release of Steeltoe that just came out. Steeltoe 3.0 recently came out, and I'm sure y'all are working on other versions of that as well. What are some of the great new features and things that we could really look forward to in that new version of Steeltoe?
So a little bit of a history lesson. I'll try to be brief. Historically, the Steeltoe team was kind of focused on the Cloud Foundry environment. Mm-hmm. So there was a lot of Cloud Foundry bits woven throughout a lot of the Steeltoe pieces. And that kind of turned off people that didn't use Cloud Foundry or didn't know anything about it. And it seemed like Steeltoe was just for Cloud Foundry. That was never really the intent, but it looks that way if you look at the 2X versions, anything below 3.0. So some of the things that we did in the 3.0 release was try and separate all the Cloud Foundry pieces and implement some new abstractions so that it'd be more pluggable. And the idea is that you should be able to take your .NET applications when you're using Steeltoe and target them for Cloud Foundry or target them for Kubernetes, or maybe at some point like an Azure native thing. And that's kind of what we're setting out to do with a lot of these abstractions. And a lot of those were made much more effective in this 3.0 release. In addition, we started adding some Kubernetes stuff too. There's a whole list of things that we did in 3.0.
Okay. And so why don't we tell me a little bit about like what are some of like the really interesting and more popular features of Steeltoe that like developers should really like pay attention to and check out?
I would have to say that the two most popular are the configuration provider for the Spring Cloud config server
Mhm.
and the service discovery libraries. The third most popular is probably the management actuators,
Yeah.
but those are a little bit more niche because you need to have something to work with those actuators.
Yeah.
There is an open source project and that anybody can pick up and use, and I'll show that later. But the configuration provider and the discovery bits are the most popular.
Right. Okay, and that makes sense. And just really quickly, I want to make sure I acknowledge the chat. We have a lot of great folks that are sending us messages. I see we have some folks here from Italy. Like, hello to everyone in Italy. We got some folks from Egypt here as well. Super cool. Really glad that y'all could join us. David, I see you in the chat. David, thank you for joining us. Sean, I see you there too, man. I really appreciate y'all being here with us. So, Tim, you mentioned Cloud Foundry, and at least from a .NET perspective, that's not like a familiar tool that we use or know about. Maybe in the Java space, I'm guessing that's like a common thing or well-known thing. Tell me a little bit about what was the goal or the benefit for using Cloud Foundry? Like, what does it give us? What does it do?
So Cloud Foundry is intended to be a cloud agnostic platform. It's, how do I explain it? I mean, it's a platform that runs on other platforms. So it makes it far simpler to build your applications. There's you still build a .NET application or a Java application, and you have the ability to just push your source code to a certain place, and these things called build packs containerize it. And there's this concept of service bindings, and so you can just almost automatically provision a database. You just say, I want a MySQL database for this thing, and it'll bind it. You'll get custom credentials just for that application. So there's a whole mess of security and ops controls that are built into it.
Sure. So let me see if I could break it down, at least so that make sure that I have it right.
Sure.
So when I think about .NET as a platform, because sometimes people call .NET a platform, .NET is a platform where we have like a runtime and programming languages and editors and tooling and stuff that as developers we could use to craft and create applications, right? But if what I'm hearing from you is correct, I'm thinking Cloud Foundry is not that per se, but it's almost like a uniformed environment, like a consistent environment that I could send my code to or send my application to, and have it provisioned and running, and regardless of whether I'm running on the cloud or if I'm running on raw hardware, if I'm running on a VM on premises or whatever, like I can have some consistency with how my application runs, as long as it's like running on Cloud Foundry. Is that correct?
To some extent. I mean, it's another platform. So basically, you deploy your apps, and they run in a runtime. Yeah. But that runtime could be hosted on a vSphere infrastructure. It could be hosted in Azure. It could be hosted in GCP. And there's a bunch of VMs, under the covers. And there's these things called service brokers that manage the interactions with the backing services.
Got it. Okay. And then I know we're also talking a little bit about Azure Spring Cloud. And I don't want to jump the gun a little bit, but I just want to make sure like I have the definitions in my head, like as we kind of go through the process. So what's the difference between Spring Cloud and Cloud Foundry? Is that is it the same thing? Is it one an evolution of another, or am I completely off base here?
They're kind of sort of similar. And this isn't really I'm not a subject matter expert in these, so sure. I'm just kind of giving you my .NET developer's perspective on it. Yeah. They have some things in common. So Pivotal's branded Cloud Foundry. One of the selling features was that it would include Spring Cloud services, which meant that they would have a very simple way of managing your config servers, your Eureka servers, and you could very easily bind your application to your config server or your discovery server, and they would just automatically know how to talk to each other. Now, Azure Spring Cloud brings those two components into the mix as well, and it does the same sort of thing with managing the availability of the config server and the discovery server. So with a library that Microsoft ships that builds on top of the Steeltoe functionality, you should automatically get provisioned and communicate with the centralized config server and the discovery server.
Okay, cool. All right, so I feel like we've been talking a lot. Can we see a little bit about what it feels like to like create or just write some code that uses Steeltoe?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, let's do it. And then while you go ahead and you're getting set up, I'll just go ahead and see what else is going on in chat. Oh wow, it looks like we have John. Like John is calling in or he's listening in from Switzerland. Hi, John. Ivan, we have Ivan from Serbia, and we also have someone from Ohio. I think we have people from like almost all corners of the globe at this point, like checking in and listening right now.
Awesome. Okay, so Hananiel's plan was to build a messaging app from scratch.
Okay.
But since this stuff is new for 3.0 and I haven't had a chance to do it personally, I'm going to just walk through one of the samples that we have and we'll just pretend that we're building it together.
Sure, let's do it.
So this application it was started as just an ASP.NET Core web application. There's a nice little README that kind of explains how to work with it. But anytime you're working with a NuGet package, you got to start with your package references, right? This just has the one. We're using steeltoe.messaging.RabbitMQ. And then that should theoretically pull in everything that we need to do messaging with RabbitMQ. So if you go and drill down into it, you can see that there's a reference to the RabbitMQ client. There's some serialization stuff. There's a retry framework in here and some messaging base classes. Once we've got that library in there, for this application, we don't have to do anything in Program CS. There's a little bit of setup work to do in the startup. We've got some Rabbit options here. I don't personally know what we're doing with those at this point, but I do know that we've got some Rabbit services that are wiring up the bits and pieces and abstractions of how the different components within the app can work with the RabbitMQ infrastructure. We've got the Rabbit admin client, which can do things like delete queues, add queues, and handle some of those lower level interactions for you, so you don't have to think about it as much.
Yeah. So then, quick question for you then. So like I've written code that uses RabbitMQ before, right? But I usually just use like the official or the default client, right?
Mm-hmm.
Default .NET RabbitMQ client. What's the benefit of me using the Steeltoe abstraction versus me just using the one that comes from the Rabbit folks, the RabbitMQ folks?
And I think Hananiel had prepared to answer that. My understanding of it, without having been able to personally dig into it yet, is that this provides some opinions about how to use it, and it should make some of those interactions simpler. So when you use the official client, did you have to do anything to specify, for example, default connection credentials?
Yeah, I mean, I think the credentials, I had them in like a configuration file, and I did a lot of manual binding. Right, so I had them inside of my app settings.json file, and then I plugged them into like one of the RabbitMQ models, as well as like the connection string, and then I definitely had to go and make sure that like I created the queue and the topic and the other things that were involved there.
Right.
So, and then I was also usually using like single instances. I don't know what that would have looked like if I was doing like a cluster or something that was hosted in the cloud. Like I'm guessing those types of things might be a little bit different as well.
Yeah, I would imagine so too. So one of the things that we're definitely doing is some sensible defaults. So if we take a quick peek at our app settings, you'll notice that there is nothing in here for RabbitMQ. So
yeah,
just kind of an entry-level experience. It should have some sensible defaults, and you should be able to just fire it up and have it work once you get these other things. So there should be a little bit less ceremony involved, just kind of this initial setup work.
Okay.
So, we're declaring some queues here this way. The Rabbit templates are used, I believe, to define what the languages are. Actually, I don't know. I'll be honest, I don't know. I know it has something to do with serialization and deserialization. And I know that the listening piece, normally you wouldn't send and receive from the same application. Sure. But this particular sample was built for just a simple, here's, not necessarily the most realistic way, but a way to put the pieces together and make them all work.
Okay.
So the way the messages are being sent is from just a standard controller. In this case, so this, some of these will, just send a message, some of these will both send and receive a message.
Mhm.
So if we fire this up and walk through, we can see how all that works. But before we do that real quick, the listener service. This is one of the other things that is, I think, particularly powerful about this. You should be able to take basically any plain old class and then just put this attribute on it. And that should just say, this guy is going to listen for a queue. And you can see that there's a class coming through. And that's kind of what it's expecting. So I'm assuming that it's automatically deserializing this using some configurable means of serialization and deserialization.
Right. So then I'm going to guess that, because for instance, when I had to do it, when I was doing it on my own, what I did actually was I created like a worker service, like a ASP.NET, plain old worker service, I guess, if you can call them plain old worker services. And like I had to implement that execute method, and I'd had that, I'd create like a RabbitMQ consumer, and I'd have it listen to queue, and like I had to do stuff, right? But now it looks like if I can create a plain class, I'm guessing, again, I haven't looked at the code, but I'm guessing Steeltoe is going to take that class that I create, and it's going to kind of inject it or plug it into like some type of background thing that's able to listen for messages, and I just need to worry about implementing the actual processing code when the message comes in.
Right. Yeah. I mean, like this is all the code that's in here. There's this service. There's the class definitions, which are just basic objects, but like that's it. So okay. in terms of listening, we said, hey, let's listen, and the framework does the magic, and it just works.
Cool. Looking in the chat really quickly, some folks are asking, is there a link to the source code? I don't know if this is on the Steeltoe repo or anywhere that folks can see it.
Yep. So the GitHub, it's github.com/SteeltoeOSS for all of our repos. And there is a samples repo. Actually, I shouldn't have said all of our repos. I'll break that rule later. And we also have an incubator for projects that aren't maybe necessarily quite ready for prime time.
Yeah, and I'll go ahead and share that in the chat really quickly so everyone could, check it out. But I'm guessing there's this code that you're showing along with like a bunch of other stuff in there too.
Yeah.
All right, so it looks like your app is running, and what are we doing now?
Trying to find a web browser.
It's in there somewhere.
Right? Okay, what port was this listening on? Was it 5,000? 5,000.
5,000.
Okay. So this is a very bare bones demo app, which is not working. That's exciting.
Does it have HTTP and HTTPS turned on, or is it just HTTP?
This one looks like it's just listening on HTTP.
Okay.
Okay.
So it probably if it's a web API, it probably has an endpoint, right? I'm guessing.
Yeah.
So you probably have to do like /API/something to go there.
It's funny. I tried this like 10 minutes ago, 20 minutes ago, whatever, just to see if it would work, and it was working.
But come on, you know as well as I do that the minute that you come on camera to show somebody something, everything stops working.
Okay, there we go. I think it probably popped the browser window somewhere that I can't find. So these are all the URLs that we can test with.
Okay.
So let's just pick one that will send and receive, just to do it all in once, so we don't have to go through all of these. This should theoretically convert that class to something that RabbitMQ will work with, and then go ahead and send it. Before we continue, we'll just go ahead and pull up the RabbitMQ dashboard.
Yeah.
And we can see that there's a message sitting here in our receive and convert queue. Let me see if I can split screen this here. Oh, sorry for all the animations.
No, that's fine. But then what's great about this, like you said, like you kind of showed before, is everything is pretty much in code configuration, right? So once you spin up your application, it's gonna do the auth, it's gonna create the queues and the exchanges and all these other things that we wanted it to create. And now, again, I just have to implement that one class, right? That says, this is a listener or this is a publisher, and go ahead and flow my messages through the system.
Absolutely. And you can see that we received our message. So, it's kind of the hello world equivalent. but it was sending a C# class over the wire through our RabbitMQ with just a few lines of code.
Got it. Nice.
So the other thing that's particularly interesting that I don't have anything to show is that this is actually a building block for some compatibility with some other Spring projects.
Okay.
There's a project out there called Spring Cloud Data Flow, and that is I don't know. It's kind of like an ETL thing that you can build your ETL components with. Right now, you can do it with all Spring stuff, and so the idea very soon is that you'll be able to have Java and Spring stuff working, or .NET and Spring stuff working interchangeably.
Oh, so that means like within the same, like using the same messaging components and configuration components, and all of that type of stuff. And I don't have to copy paste them between .NET and Java. I could just have them in the same world.
Yeah, so if you maybe have some complex data processing pipeline and you potentially have different teams working on it, and some of your teams are .NET and some of them are Java, you could theoretically have some polyglot stuff happening across the message queues.
Nice.
I know that some of the use cases for people that are looking to do Spring Cloud Data Flow type functionality with .NET is, for example, replacing old SSIS packages. Some people have crazy complicated processes that are using .NET code that run in a SQL Server environment that isn't very testable or portable. This functionality is a building block that will provide a brighter future for that kind of work.
Nice. And I'm guessing, do you all have like docs or blog posts or anything like that we can point people to that they can learn more about that stuff from?
I believe so. David Diref, if you're listening, you want to throw some messages out there in the chat?
Yeah, David, if you're in the chat, go ahead and throw some stuff. And that'll be great. All right, so we just got a really quick sample of using the messaging component. And then for folks that don't know, like we actually do have some on .NET episodes where I think like you've been on and Hananiel has been on and tons of other folks have been on to talk about things like service discovery and like the health actuators and also some of that basic setup, right? Like what is Steeltoe and how we could use them. And so if folks are interested, I definitely recommend you go ahead and if you're on YouTube right now, like you're on the right channel anyway, go ahead and browse for our channel and check out some of our other Steeltoe episodes that we have. But then also too, like the Steeltoe folks all have some great tutorials and documentation on the website as well.
So a lot of getting started documents, and then that samples repo has a ton of examples. There's even a port of the music store that the ASP.NET Core team uses that's ported out into microservices.
Nice. So why don't we talk a little bit now more about the Azure Spring Cloud, right? Like tell me what that is, and then how, like, what is your company's relation to it, and how could we make use of it today as .NET developers?
So as .NET developers, if you have an Azure subscription, you can create an Azure Spring Cloud instance, and you can publish your applications there. You're going to want to use Steeltoe to do it because of the interactions with the config server and the discovery server.
Sure.
In terms of the relationship, I guess I know that there are people from VMware that are involved. I believe it's primarily Microsoft doing most of the work in productizing that, and it's the VMware people are somewhat advisory. But I'm not an expert on that, so I'm just kind of winging it from my observations. My involvement has been helping to make sure that the Steeltoe stuff works.
Sure.
So.
But I guess what I want to know more so is, like, if you're a Spring Cloud customer, it's just Spring Cloud, right? Like there's nothing special about it other than the fact that it's being hosted on Azure. I'm guessing it essentially should be the same thing. So if you had like a lift and shift scenarios where, we're on premises today, we want to move into the cloud, but we're running Spring Cloud on premises, like moving over to Azure Spring Cloud would be a good option for them, I'm guessing, right? Because it should be the same thing.
Yeah, that's what they tell me.
Okay, sure, that makes sense. What is it like in general? Like, what are some of the things? Like, can we talk about like what are some of the things that we get out of using Spring Cloud? Like, I know you mentioned the configuration server already, and I'm guessing you also mentioned the health actuators, which are like health checks and being able to get the status of our running code, right? Is it up? Is it down? Is it ready? Is it not ready? So on and so forth. like what else do we get out of that?
I'll tell you what, how about if we move on to another demo app? I've got the Spring Cloud Pet Clinic, and that can kind of show us all these different pieces in action. So we knew more than just talk about it.
I love demos. Let's do it. I love it.
All right. So the Spring Pet Clinic has been around, I don't know, since the dawn of time. It's gone through many variations. It was originally, and this kind of predates my involvement with it by a country mile, kind of a demo for the Spring framework and how to do things with Spring and Java. It's been forked and ported across a bunch of different design ideas. That they did a fork for the Spring Cloud stuff, and we actually forked off of the Spring Cloud stuff, and we replaced several of the application services with Steeltoe services. So now we can run some of our Steeltoe services and Java services side by side in the same environment. So I'm going to go ahead and just, oh, not that one. I don't need to rebuild. We'll just run a Docker Compose up and fire up all of this stuff so we can see it all. You'll notice that this is going to fire up a whole bunch of things. Got a config server, Grafana, a discovery server, a tracing server. That's going to get really chatty really fast.
Sure.
But it's all the different things that really kind of help you when you're doing a microservices. And some of this stuff is essential in microservices, but it's absolutely still very useful outside in your traditional app environment. Because who doesn't want to know how their app is performing when it's running in production?
Sure.
All this stuff is open source and it's free, so you don't have to pay some APM vendor or anything crazy like that.
And one of the things that I've noticed with folks in the microservice world is that it's great that it's open source and it's great that it's a lot of options, but sometimes there's just so many options for folks that are coming in. They don't have like prescriptive advice as to how to put those components together. Like, I don't know what I should do for metrics. I don't know what I should do for tracing. I don't know what should I do for service discovery. Like, there's lots of options for each, and each of them with their own benefits and pros and cons and things like that. So it's really good if we have like a place that's kind of like figured out some of that stuff for us, right? Because as a developer, I kind of want to just write code. You know what I mean? Like, I kind of want to get to it. And
you don't
do is kind of package that stuff up for us, right?
Yeah, and you definitely don't want to pick a solution and find out it's the wrong solution 6 months later. So when you add things like Steeltoe in the mix, we try and make it more portable for you. When it comes to metrics specifically, since you mentioned it, we're right now working with OpenTelemetry, so that, that's another layer of abstraction on top of, or underneath, I guess, in this case. But you have the ability there to choose your exporter. So you can collect all of your metrics and your traces in an OpenTelemetry format, and you can export it to Zipkin or whatever else you might want to use. And so as a developer, you just pull in this generic library and then change it later as you need to. Cool. So this stuff all fired up. We talked about service registries. For anybody who doesn't know, it's basically like a phone book for your application instances. So when you're writing your app, you can say, you know what, I don't know what the address of this thing is going to be. And I don't want to worry about the address when I'm running local, when I'm running in the cloud, what's my staging environment. You just say, it's the customer service. You figure it out. Something else will figure it out for me. Yeah. And so in this case, the customer service happens to be running in a Docker environment. So it's got this hokey IPv6 address, but the application doesn't have to care. So one thing that's cool is based on top of this phone book, we can hook up the Spring Boot admin, and we can start from the dashboard here. We see another view. Now, it'd be nice if all this stuff was in one place, but again, open source. So it's all different projects that evolved at different times for different reasons.
Sure.
But you can see at a glance what the health is of all the different things that are involved.
Oh, nice. I like this.
So the vet service, the visit service, and the customer service are all of our Steeltoe services. The admin server is the Spring Boot admin that we're looking at here. And the API gateway is actually the front-end application, which looks like this.
Nice.
It's, pretty basic. Like I said, it's been around for forever, and you can kind of tell, but it does the job. So, when we talk about things like management and, what your app is actually doing, you can see we have a little health view We got some metadata about the host and the port again. You can see where the health information is coming from. Steeltoe includes an info actuator out of the box. We just get you, some really basic helpful build information. So if you ever deal with a repeated problem of trying to figure out how you're going to pull the file version information and make it accessible, automatically we've got the file version of the application. We also, because why not, threw in the file version for the Steeltoe stuff, so you can see at a glance what version of Steeltoe you're running, what version your application's running. One of the other things we talked about earlier was the configuration information and centralizing that. We didn't really talk about necessarily why you would want to centralize your configuration. I'll show you the actual configuration, how we built up this particular configuration in a minute, but you can see with this configuration actuator, all the different providers that are in this application's configuration. So the interesting bit, what was actually centralized, is coming back from this config server configuration provider, which is a lot of fun to say. But you can see there's a whole bunch of stuff in here, and none of this is actually kept inside the application. So this is all stored externally to the application and could be environment dependent.
Right.
So the applications themselves have app settings that look pretty similar to that RabbitMQ sample from earlier. We've got some logging information, and that's actually it for this one. When we run in a Docker environment, we need to specify that the config server is located at something other than localhost port 8888. So in this case, it's running at the host name is just config server. So that's it. That's all the application needs to know directly itself at runtime. It gets all the rest of the information from the config server.
Got it. And really quick from the chat, looks like we have Farouk. Hi, Farouk. Thank you so much for being here with us. And Farouk is asking, in his presentation, I see him using Docker Compose. So wondering about K8s. He says, I haven't actually touched Docker Compose since working with K8s. So I'm guessing his question is more so around, can you deploy these things to Kubernetes? I'm guessing the answer is yes, but I'm going to let you give an official answer, Tim, from your side.
The answer is yes. Hananiel and I did a talk last year at Spring One. That video should be available online. We actually took the Steeltoe microservice, the music store port, and we deployed that to all the Kubernetes. So all of this stuff can work on Kubernetes in all the places. For this particular demo, we didn't have all the time in the world, so this particular one isn't set up to run there yet, but it absolutely could.
Right. Cool. And then you are running this on .NET Core, I'm guessing. So, pretty much like anywhere that .NET Core runs, you could run Steeltoe stuff. Absolutely.
So real quickly back to the centralized configuration, the way Spring Cloud Config Server works is you can have an application, a basic application file, right? So this particular one will be returned in all the requests to the config server. It doesn't matter which application is making the request. All of them get this basic information. But then on top of that, you can have application-specific stuff. So for example, our vet service might need to know what database to use or something along those lines. This particular example doesn't use databases, so it doesn't need that level of configuration right now. But you can see that that idea of layering configuration. It's the same as you might have an app settings.json and app settings.development.json or .production. It's the same idea. It's just you don't have to store it inside your application. So this can actually be hosted in a Git repo somewhere, and then the config server can keep an eye on the Git repo, and you get instant config updates. That way.
I'd also really like the model of using a configuration service. And maybe we could talk about that really briefly. So I know for me, when I first started building applications, everything was either in a config file or it was hard coded in the app. And experience has taught us that that's not always the best way to do things, right?
Yeah.
Particularly with microservices, right? Or any type of distributed application that you have more than one instance of the thing, right? So that's containers or not, right? As long as you have more than one copy, how do you update configuration over multiple copies, right? 10, 20, 100 copies of the same thing. And one of the benefits of using something like a configuration server, right? And again, Tim, you could let me know if I'm wrong or not. But one of the benefits of using something like that is now I have a central location that all of the things can get the same configuration, right? And of course, we can add security boundaries and proper namespacing and those types of things around it. But when it comes to updating, right, like I can update it in one place, right? And then now all of my other parts of my system should just be able to get that update as soon as it happens.
Absolutely. You don't need to, SSH into your production server and make a change to the file on each server anymore. Those days were not fun. But yeah, just in this case, if it's backed by a Git repo, you can have your source control history and all of your change controls around the configuration files itself. And you don't have to redeploy anything.
Right. I think that's the big thing too. Like I don't have to redeploy anything because every time we hit that deploy button, it's like, you kind of cross your fingers and be like, please don't break anything. Please don't break anything. Please don't break anything.
Real quickly, we see the log information in the background. I'm going to turn something up to a ridiculous volume just to show the dynamic log level management.
Yeah.
And which one? You know what? We'll just turn all of the Steeltoe stuff down to trace. Oh gosh. So say the developer accidentally deployed wrong log level settings to production.
Yeah.
Well, this is just comical, right? Like, oh no. But we don't have to, redeploy anything. We could just, just click a button and the noise goes away. And we're not going to be filling up the logs or filling up the storage of wherever those logs go.
That's very cool. And I actually do remember looking through your documentation and like the dynamic logger functionality. I believe you could use it with something like Serolog. So for folks that are familiar with using Serolog for logging in .NET applications, you can enable like a dynamic logging component. So you could do like some of the stuff that Tim is showing us right now. So again, like I kind of just want to hammer in the point that like we're looking at a set of great patterns, right? And you can pull in Steeltoe into your app, regardless of whether you're using Spring Boot or not, Azure or not, containers or not, and you can enable some of these really cool functionalities by just pulling in a NuGet package.
Yeah, it's a bit of a game changer. And it's not like you have to maintain some of this stuff at your company on your own. It's out here. And if you want to contribute, that's awesome. We'd love contributions for whatever. You mentioned, like, for example, you mentioned Serolog. That was actually a contribution. Oh, so nice. We've done a bit of work with it since the contribution, but it started by somebody in the community saying, hey, I love this dynamic logging. I want it to work with Serolog. How do we do it? And, we kind of worked with them and now we have a solution that works.
Nice.
And we can do the same thing with other loggers too. If there was other logging frameworks that somebody wanted to do this with, we can, work together and figure that out.
Sure. I mean, that's the whole nature of open source, right? Like we can put these things out and collaborate together to create like some really interesting experiences. And I wanted to point that out too, because like, as I was looking in the chat, I saw some folks asking about Azure Service Bus. And I think today, the messaging support only supports RabbitMQ today.
Mm-hmm.
But, just like someone from the community came in and added support for Serolog, someone could come in and send a PR or, make a suggestion or, maybe even like, just send a draft PR or something like that, that adds support of like other messengers like Service Bus or ActiveMQ or whatever other thing that you might be interested in using.
Yeah, I mean, we're not going to build it if we don't know that you want it. So we have our own priorities and our own feature list for what we're planning to do. And a lot of that's out on GitHub. And if you see something that, you as a community member think, oh, I would like to have support for MSMQ, please don't ask for that. We could put that on the roadmap and, somebody else who cares can help work it out. In terms of what's coming next with messaging, obviously I said focused on the data flow experience. The next provider that we're expecting to do in the near future is Kafka.
Nice.
So we have talked about doing the Azure Service Bus, but Kafka's up next because people have asked for it.
Right. Someone's going to watch this video and they're going to say, well, Tim said that if I put a issue out for MSMQ, they're going to do it. So
maybe someone will do it.
Wait for it. It's going to happen. Someone's going to say, I want MSMQ. And then we're going to have to support that.
Don't sign me up for that.
That'll be funny. But But yeah, Tim, this stuff looks really exciting, man. What else do you got to show us around like Spring Boot and Steeltoe?
So there's a few other things that are set up in here with like Zipkin, Prometheus, Grafana. I guess we can take a quick spin through these.
Yeah, let's take a look at the Zipkin, because I know for a lot of folks, every time they see the Zipkin demo, they're like, I didn't know I need it, but now I've seen it, I know I need it.
Yeah, so the idea with Zipkin is that, a request comes into a service, and then that request calls another service, calls another service, calls another service. The whole point of Zipkin is to be able to quickly and easily see it in one place. So if you have a request that isn't for Eureka or Actuator,
yeah. Now, what you're doing there at the top is you're essentially just specifying like the service name, like the name of the things, right?
Yeah, so Zipkin lets you filter. So you could, for example, look for long traces. So maybe this is supposed to be a really high performant thing. Nothing should ever take more than 10 milliseconds. Okay, well, let's just say, show me everything that takes more than 10 milliseconds. Get a nice quick report of basically all of your problems. And then you have the ability to drill down into them. I wasn't able to figure out what's going on today. Something's wrong with this particular sample. Again, this port is new. I mean, like, we've been working on it for like a week.
Right.
So there's some kinks to work out.
Sure.
And this is one of them. But the idea is you get a bit of a waterfall picture, and there's almost no work done to get to here. So in terms of, Steeltoe doing things for you, this is it. We added distributed tracing, and we said we want to send it to Zipkin. Like, that's it.
Nice.
Now we're sending our traces to Zipkin.
And then under the covers, I believe because I like to like sneak around inside of like GitHub. Under the covers, I believe you're using the Open Telemetry SDK/API for .NET to surface some of these things. So if folks are familiar with Open Telemetry and that family of tools, then it should be not tremendously difficult to add another exporter. Right? When I say another exporter, right, like right now you're exporting to Zipkin, right? And so, in your app, it's instrumented, and like that telemetry is being sent to that tool that you showed us that's capturing those spans and traces. But if you wanted to use something else like Jaeger or application insights or something different, right? Because you're using like that underlying Open Telemetry support, you should be able to do that too, right?
Yeah, the idea is you would just change this line right here, and so instead of using Zipkin, it would be use whatever.
Like use something else.
Yeah, I think there are a few other options that are out there. I haven't personally spent a lot of time in this particular space, so I'm not an expert on it. But yeah, I know that there are some others.
Cool.
So interesting side note about the Open Telemetry bits. What's in Open Telemetry for C# today actually started out as Open Census, and that was actually the initial work on that was done by a member of our team as well.
Nice.
So it's kind of bringing it home there.
Nice. Very cool. Very cool. Okay. So now we saw Zipkin. Talk to us a little bit about like Grafana and the Grafana support that y'all have.
I'm not sure. I didn't do this piece either.
Okay. But it's in the box and it's there. So
yeah.
If you want to play with it, we can definitely check it out.
Yeah, I unfortunately have no idea how this was built. I just run it and I click the link, and in this particular case, we have some metrics that are showing up automatically. I think that Grafana is maybe reading from Prometheus, because I know that Prometheus endpoints are available in the application, and Prometheus is scraping the metrics out of the apps.
Yeah. And so for folks that are in the chat and watching the video, if you're not familiar with what Grafana is, it's essentially a graphing tool, right? So it's not a database. It's not an application framework. It's a thing that sucks in data and generates like pretty charts and graphs for you. And obviously I'm simplifying it, but that's really what it's there for. So if you had something like Zipkin that we showed a little while ago, which is somewhat of a, it's collecting those metrics, that information. And then I'm sure there's Prometheus, like Tim mentioned, somewhere in the infrastructure that's also collecting metrics. Like you can use Grafana to visualize all of the information for your app in one space. So instead of like, you see what he's doing now, and he's going to Prometheus and he's going to Zipkin and he's like jumping between different windows, you can kind of collect that in a single view and then create a really interesting dashboard that, you could put it up in your team room, or, you can create different alerts and things like that based on those metrics that you've collected from different places.
I mean, you can see there's a huge pile of things to choose from. So, CPU usage might be one that you care about.
Yeah. So here's a question for you, Tim. So I know with different exporters for different frameworks, there's a Node exporter and a Java exporter, and like there's exporters for these different things. How do we know what metrics are available? You know what I mean? Like, does that make sense? Like, how do I know like what's available to look at?
That is a good question. I know that Steeltoe has a metrics endpoint that should actually provide you a list. So if you're using a Steeltoe application, you should get you should be able to hit it and get just a specific list of here's all the metrics that are available from this application.
Okay, because I'm guessing like as you implemented it, like throughout Steeltoe and some other things, I'm guessing like you're creating the metrics, right? Like someone's creating the metrics, right?
Right.
And so I'm guessing when we used the Steeltoe distributed tracing, I'm guessing you're collecting the metrics. And if we're using logging and we have logging and Steeltoe kind of plugged in together, like if I have my Sarella set up and I plug that in with Steeltoe, I'm guessing like all those things kind of get collected and aggregated together. And somehow that will get turned into like those, those counters and gauges and other things that will go out into Prometheus and Grafana.
Yeah.
Okay.
Now I think we've set the stage for Azure Spring Cloud.
Yes. Okay, let's do it.
Okay, let's get some of this stuff out of the way. Oh, before I move on, this is the response from config server. So you can see the different config files stacking in action here. So just really quickly. This one's the customer service.yaml, the application.yaml. And I think this was, specifically, there's a Docker profile inside that application YAML. So a lot of really cool things that you can do with the config server stuff.
Got it. Okay.
Okay, all that's out of the way. This is the Azure Spring Cloud view on the Azure portal. Just for kicks, I will go ahead and initiate a deployment. So I'm going to go ahead and attempt to kill this environment just for kicks, and we'll see if it survives a live deployment.
Are you going to like right-click deploy? Is that what we're doing?
No. Once in a while I get to mess with some PowerShell, and so I write overly complicated things. So I separated out my functions so that when I have my PowerShell script, I can just do silly little tiny things like say Azure Spring Cloud create app. Here's the name of it. Here's the framework that it runs on.
Nice.
But then it can do something like deploy this whole thing. And, I made it overly complex again, and I put switches on the end. So we're just going to go ahead and deploy all the apps. If I hadn't already been running this, you would need to publish your .NET apps, build jars, do a little bit of prep work. You need to create a slot in Azure Spring Cloud before you can deploy to it. But some of that magic has already been done because it would take a few minutes. And you're going to notice some windows pop up. That's so that I can get this to complete in under 2 minutes. If I let these all run in serial, we'd be waiting for about 10 minutes. So we'll just we'll just let this guy run in the background. But in Azure Spring Cloud, you have a nice little view of the different apps that exist. So you get the name of the service, what platform it's running on. So whether it's .NET or Java, you can run Java 8 or Java 11. A provisioning state. So all of our stuff it's out there, but you can see like the apps that are deploying in real time. This one's down.
Right.
This one should be up.
You said we can run Java 8 and Java 11. Can we run .NET 5 on that yet? Or is that coming soon?
I don't have any real-time information on it, but I would assume that it's coming soon.
Okay.
And I think that's it might be partially based on customer feedback. I'm a little bit out of the loop on that one.
Sure.
But I did do some testing with Steeltoe and .NET 5, and our stuff should work in .NET 5. So no surprises there. But
okay, we can blame Hananiel because he's not here, so we'll just put that on him.
Sure. So I mentioned that the config server management gets easier. There is a config server or maybe a cluster of config servers running somewhere in Azure Spring Cloud. The only thing I need to worry about is how I want the config server to get its information. So for me, it's just, well, go ahead and use this config repo. And we wanted to pull from one specific branch. So we've got a branch out there named Azure Spring Cloud. And this is all I had to do to configure that.
Nice.
So there's a bunch of other things that you get like you would expect anytime you're working with Azure. If you want custom VNet configuration, you get some deployment management. So you can do similar to what you get with Azure App Service. You know, you deploy to a staging slot, you test it out, you make sure it's good to go, and then you swap it when you're ready.
Nice. And then I see there's SSL settings in here. There's some test endpoints, which is interesting.
So this Azure Spring Cloud is built on top of Kubernetes, and by default, your applications are not exposed. So if I go back to this apps list, it's not evident from here, but for example, this vet service doesn't have an external endpoint, so it's only accessible within the cluster, unless you use those test endpoints. So the test endpoints provide some inline credentials, and I have no idea how this actually works behind the scenes, but you can just paste it in here and you can see there's my ridiculous credentials, and then they just disappear, and it does a 404 because it's an API and there's no UI for it.
Sure.
But if we look at the actuators, there they are. We can go to their health information. Maybe I was probably deploying right now.
Yeah, but so for folks that are curious, because we're always going to get the question, Docker containers, Kubernetes, yada yada yada. Would you say that this is almost like easy mode for Kubernetes for folks that want to run stuff on Kubernetes, but I don't want to think about a lot of YAML files, and I don't want to think about like deployments and stateful sets and stuff, right?
Yes.
Like, because there's a lot of learning curve when it comes to like getting into some of these things.
Absolutely. And so that was actually one of the big selling features of Cloud Foundry as well, is that it takes a lot of the complexity away. And you just say, there's what's the name? Ansi had this haiku is, here's my code, run it on the cloud for me. I do not care how. And this is kind of the same idea. It's like, I don't want to care about any of the infrastructure. I just want something that holds my configuration and some kind of a phone book for where the other app instances are.
Right.
You do all the rest. Here's my app. Just figure it out. And that's exactly what this is all about.
And now a question I have now is, so this is inside of Azure, obviously. How does this play with like other Azure services? So again, like if I wanted to use something like Application Insights, or if I wanted to use like SQL Server or Azure Service Bus instead of RabbitMQ, is that can I just go ahead and call those things, or does this kind of exist in a box and I have to like worry about opening ports and security settings and that type of stuff?
So yes and no. I don't really have an example or direct knowledge on the ports and the networking aspects of it. I mean, I would imagine that it's just another Azure service, and so whatever you want to work with, you have to manage the network as you would for any other interaction between Azure services. Yeah. So depending on how tightly locked down your databases are, it may or may not be a problem. But there is a notion of service bindings here. This isn't quite as mature as what you would find in a Cloud Foundry environment. And it's actually not possible at all yet, not supported for .NET. So that one coming soon, yeah. But if you're, for example, looking at a Java application, you should be able to create a service binding. And I don't know if I have any resources to pull from, but you pick your subscription, you pick the kind of service that you want to bind with. So far, it's just Azure Cosmos DB, Redis, and MySQL. Got it. But then you would just pick your resource from the list, and then if it's Cosmos DB, your API type, and you pick this part is directly integrated, and this will auto-populate very nicely.
Okay.
In terms of the app services, or application insights rather, I know that there's some level of integration, right? Like we can go through here and we get these metrics and we get these logs. There is also a distributed tracing dashboard in here.
Oh, nice.
Which I think this is built on top of Zipkin. I could be totally wrong on that.
Yeah, I know they do support OpenTelemetry to some extent. But I don't know if it's Zipkin under the covers. I'm not sure about that.
I think it was able to read in. Oh, that's not what I want. I think it was able to read in the Zipkin format.
Okay.
So that might be complaining because it wasn't. Wait, okay. You know what? All those windows disappeared, and we never checked to see if they actually were successful.
That would be a good idea. We should check if stuff like actually successfully went.
You can tell that I wrote those scripts today, so I didn't have any good error handling. I was hoping for the happy path, and
sure,
these guys decided not to register. So,
and I'm just looking in the chat too, and David is saying .NET on Azure Spring Cloud is still in preview, but Java is generally available. So for folks that are watching and are like, oh man, why is the thing not like turned on, or why is it gray or whatever? It is still in preview. You could try it out now. You could try it out with your apps and, for testing purposes, because it is a preview service. But definitely send the team feedback and let us know what you feel about it, what you'd like to see, what you like and you don't like, and those types of things. So, kind of like what David said, right? Kind of like what Tim said and what David's saying inside of the chat. If you tell us, we'll take that feedback and we'll use that to make like intelligent decisions about their roadmap going forward. Yep,
absolutely. Feedback drives direction.
Yeah, for sure. All right. Well, we just have a few minutes left. Definitely want to say thank you for everyone that's been in the chat so far, like asking tons of questions. Obviously, we have tons more folks joining from like Africa and South America and tons of stuff. Really appreciate you all joining us. Tim, do you have any like closing words or any final things you want to show us before you take off?
I think I have a slide I was supposed to put up. Oh, I didn't even talk through this, did I?
Oh, let's talk about it then.
Well, we walked through it all and we lived it. So this was the architecture diagram that I was supposed to use to explain all the different pieces that were in play for that. So from a high level, you can see you come in on the website, you go through all the traffic is routed through your Spring Cloud gateway, and it's routed to the different backing services, and some of the responses are aggregated. This is a very interesting application, so you can feel free to download the source code, which I probably didn't get around to putting the URL on. This is the one thing that was in the incubator. So I can pull that URL up on screen real quick. Okay. So this is where we're doing this work on the pet clinic. And find me on Twitter if you need links for this stuff later.
All right. Cool.
There's a lot more to cover than we could possibly get to in 1 hour. So just some general information here.
Nice. And we do have a quick question. This one's coming in from Twitch from Small Fluffy Rodent. I really love these like usernames. But this person's asking, excuse my ignorance, is this the same Spring framework as in Java Spring Framework / inversion of control or some other framework?
So Spring is a huge collection of projects. So Steeltoe is a small collection of projects, some of which are inspired by Spring, primarily Spring Boot and Spring Cloud. Mm-hmm. But Spring Framework is in the mix. I am not an expert on all things Spring. I just have the amount of exposure that I need. So Spring Framework is one of the pieces in the puzzle. Most of the stuff that we're working with in Azure Spring Cloud is specifically Spring Cloud. Spring Cloud.
Cool. Great. So there we go. Hopefully that answers his or her question. All right, man. Well, hey, Tim, thank you so much, man. This has been great. For all of you that have been joining us and stuck around for like the past hour, I hope you saw some value out of this. Definitely remember to head over to the Steeltoe repo. Definitely check out the getting started guides and the documentation so you can learn a little bit about how some of this stuff works. We did share the link earlier to the samples. I can share that again really quickly because I know folks were asking about those samples. I'll go ahead and pop that in the chat. So if you're on YouTube and or Twitch, you should see that popping in right now. And if you're watching the recording of this, definitely check out the show notes and we'll make sure we'll put that in there too for folks that are interested. But again, thank you all so much for joining us. Tim, thank you so much for being here. Always great to have you and your teammates along. And hope we'll see you all next week or next time for on .NET Live.
Thanks.
So bye everyone. Take care.